Hey, what's up? My name is Crystal. These are jars of pickles that I have canned over the past few years. Today, I'm going to taste test them to see if they're still good. Basically, canned foods on the shelf that you've canned at home are usually good for about a year. And that is just the guideline from the USDA. The National Center for Home Food Preservation, they have their guidelines too. You just always want to make sure that whatever you're eating is safe to eat. These are from 2022, 2 years ago. These are cucumbers that we grew here in our garden that I made dill pickles with, and pop seal is still down. If I look underneath, I can still see the rubber seal completely sealed around the top of the jar. They were stored in my dark, cool pantry. Rarely saw light until today. When I take the lid off, I'm gonna want to hear that vacuum pop sound where it goes. I don't know how to make the sound, but we'll listen for it when I open it. We're gonna smell it to make sure it smells like pickles and that it doesn't smell funny or weird. We're gonna make sure that it looks okay, and then we're gonna do a little taste test to see what they taste like after 2 years. These ones are from 2023. It's the same exact recipe, and then I also have spears that I made last week. We're gonna try those also and see what they taste like. I actually have dill pickle chips from 2022 and spears. They smell okay. They smell like pickles. Actually, the consistency seems pretty good. And then here's the spears. That looks like. There's still definitely a good crunch to them. Now we're gonna taste it. Those are really good. They have a very strong dill flavor, and they're salty, and there's still a snap when I crunch on them. And I'm gonna try one of the pickle chips. The flavor is really, really good. They're not mushy, but they don't have that snap that the spear did. So far, so good. Those ones taste a little bit spicier too. I must have added a little bit more peppercorns to that one. All right, let's open the 2023 one. They smell really good. This one's definitely not mushy in any way. I'm pleasantly surprised to say that it has the same exact consistency as the ones from 2022. It just tells me that once they're on the shelf, the consistency isn't really affected too much after a year. And then these ones are the ones that I canned last week. Normally you'd want it on the shelf for like 2 weeks before you taste test it. It's been a week. I'm gonna try it anyway. It's really the salt that keeps the pickles crunchy, and the method that I use to can these, you soak them in a saltwater brine for a day before you can them. These do tend to be a little bit on the salty side. I try and wash a lot of that off, but they still can be a little on the salty side. And then I also use Pickle Crisp, which is just calcium chloride. That helps to keep them crunchy also. Those ones are really good. Those ones might be the best ones I've ever made. I'm glad that worked out, because that could have gone really bad. I think those are the best pickles I've ever made. So, if you want to know how to make them, we're gonna get into it now. I filmed the whole process and I walk you through step by step on how to make the pickles. If you are interested in just looking for a particular part, I will have all of the timestamps listed down in the description of the video. I will also have links to many of the things that I use on our Amazon storefront. It's an affiliate link. Any sales made from our links, we do get a commission for, and we're super grateful for that. But it's really just for you to see the stuff that we use and about how much it costs. Let me know if you have any questions, and let's get into it. I'm following the same recipe that I have in previous years. It's the Grandma's Dill Pickles recipe in the Ball Complete Book of Home Preserving on page 326. I also have other videos where I show making these same exact pickles but using a regular water bath canner. This time I'm using our electric one. It's the same process though either way. Wide mouth pint-sized jars. These are the easiest to pack with cucumbers in my opinion, as they don't have the shoulders to work around like with regular mouth jars. I washed these in our dishwasher the night before and set them on a towel upside down until I'm ready to can with them. I have a box of wide mouth lids, replacement wide mouth bands, ladle, a canning funnel, jar grippers, bubble tool that also measures headspace, distilled white vinegar, a lint-free cloth for cleaning the rims, water to fill the canner, a folded towel for the countertop, and a cheesecloth, or I have one of these metal tea infuser balls, just something that you can use to infuse the pickling spice into the brine. For ingredients, we have cucumbers, mostly pickling. There's some slicers in there, but they're on the small side, so they'll be perfect for this. Fresh dill from our garden, washed and finely chopped, including the stems. And this is chestnut red garlic that we grew. Peppercorns, these are not included in the recipe, I just like to add them. Mustard seed, some additional dill weed, this is also optional. Pickling spice, pickle crisp, this is one of the ways I use to keep the pickles crunchy. Distilled white vinegar, pickling salt. Using pickling salt instead of regular salt prevents the brine from becoming cloudy. And filtered water. On the first day, I went out to the garden and harvested all of the cucumbers that I could find along with dill. I washed the cucumbers just using tap water and set them to dry a bit on a towel. I did take a quick measurement to make sure I had the right amount for the recipe. Then to 4 cups of filtered water, I added half-ish cups of pickling salt and gave that a good stir to dissolve most of the salt. I had finished off a bag of pickling salt and didn't feel like opening another one at that point, so I just used whatever was left in the bag. I set the brine off to the side and started cutting up cucumbers. I removed the blossom and stem ends and cut them into spears. I still have pickle chips left over in the pantry from last year and didn't want to make those this time around. I did have to taste every single cucumber to make sure that they were not bitter. It's been an incredibly hot and humid summer here, and the result is the occasional bitter cucumber. There were only a few small ones that were not good, but the rest of them were great. I'm trimming each cucumber spear to fit the jar. Any of the leftover pieces I'm putting into a bowl to eat with lunch. That way nothing really goes to waste. Now that the cucumbers are cut up into spears, I'm going to be pouring that brine that we just made over the top of them. I did add a bit more water to make sure it covered the top, but not too much because I added ice too, which will melt, and I didn't want the bowl to overflow in the fridge. I placed an inverted plate on top and put that entire bowl into the fridge to sit until tomorrow. I began the following day with filling our electric water bath canner with water to get that preheated. I then went ahead and washed the dill and peeled the garlic. Once the ingredient prep was all set, I took the bowl of cucumbers out of the fridge. I make sure to rinse them really well because they are covered in salt water. The salt water helps to keep the pickles crunchy, but it can also make them too salty. So I make sure to wash off as much of it as I can. Then to make the pickling brine, we have to move over to the stove. I use a reusable tea ball for the pickling spice. Otherwise, you can use a piece of cheesecloth or something tied into a pouch. I then hung the pickling spice on the side of the pot. In the pot, I add 8 cups of filtered tap water, 6 cups of white vinegar, 3/4 of a cup of pickling salt, and 1/4 cup of sugar. I give that a stir, and over medium-high heat, I bring this to a boil, giving the occasional stir to help to dissolve the sugar in the salt. At this point, I turn the heat on the water bath canner to get it preheated a bit. Once it's all boiling, I lowered the heat, place a cover on the top, and continued to soft boil for 15 minutes. The goal at this point is just to infuse the pickling spice into the liquid. Back to the jars, I am now going to pack them with the cucumbers. I put as many as I am able to in each of the jars, making sure that there is a 1/2 inch of room over the cucumbers. They shouldn't sit right up to the lid. They need a 1/2 inch of headspace. To each of the pint jars, I then added 1 clove of garlic, 1 teaspoon of mustard seed, 1/3 of a teaspoon of peppercorns, 1 generous pinch of fresh dill, 1/2 teaspoon of dill weed, and then 1/8 of a teaspoon of pickle crisp. Once the jars are all packed with cucumbers and spices, it's time to add the brine. It doesn't say this in the recipe, but I do let the brine cool slightly before pouring it over the cucumbers. When I do this, I'm making sure to leave 1/2 inch of headspace at the top of the jar. The headspace is the distance between the contents of the jar and the top of the jar. Headspace requirements vary depending on what is being canned, but overfilling a jar can cause the lid not to seal during the canning process, as well as cause siphoning, which is when the liquids inside the jar leave the jar via the top during the canning process. Using the bubble tool, I remove as many of the bubbles as I am able to between each pickle, then top off again with more brine if it's needed. Check the headspace again, and then once that's all set, make sure the rim is clean. Any debris on the jar rim can prevent the lid from sealing, so in order to prevent that, we clean it with some white vinegar and a lint-free cloth. Either a t-shirt rag or a flour sack towel, anything that doesn't leave any lint behind. Once cleaned, center the lid on the jar and tighten one of the bands around it finger tight. Finger tight is just the tips of your fingers on the rim and twisting until resistance is met. No need to crank it down. Tightening it too much can cause the lids not to seal properly and possibly crack the jar. When all the jars are filled and the lids are on, we can go ahead and add them to the water bath canner that has been preheating. I then add the jars one by one to the water bath canner, making sure there is at least about an inch of water over the top of the jars. Once they're all cozy in there, I turn up the canner to bring it to a boil. Once it is at a rolling boil, then we can process them for 10 minutes. After the 10 minutes is up, turn off the canner, remove the lid, but make sure it's pointed so that the steam is directed away from your face because it can burn you, and allow the jars to sit in the canner for an additional 5 minutes. This will allow the jars to cool slightly before removing them from the canner. Any drastic change in temperature for the jars can cause them to crack. That is why we allow them to cool slightly in the canner before moving them right away to the counter. Another way is by adding a folded towel to the countertop to prevent the cool countertop from shocking the hot jars. They will sit there for about a day, then I remove the bands, label them, and store them in our pantry. Removing the bands helps to prevent a false sealing effect. Technically, the jars are good for about a year according to the guidelines, but it's always important to check seals before opening, do a smell test, and if anything doesn't seem right, it's not worth eating. Those are so good. So that's how all the jars turned out. I would say the only difference that I did with this batch versus the past few years was that I definitely added way more dill than I normally have. I can for sure taste the difference. Texture wise, they're a little bit crunchier than the ones from last year and the year before, but that could also be because of the pickle chips. The pickle chips tend to be a little bit softer than the spears. The saltwater brine along with the pickle crisp I really think makes a difference. That'll do it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. We will see you next time. Bye!